I was halfway through chopping wood behind my cabin when I heard the gravel crunch in that annoying, too slow to be casual way, just enough to make a point. I turned and, sure enough, there she was, Pamela Withers, the self-declared queen of the Hidden Pines Homeowners Association. She had that clipboard again, clutched like a Bible, and her sunglasses were perched high on her bleach blonde hair, like she was about to direct traffic instead of harass residents. "Samuel, I've been trying to get a hold of you," she called out, walking right up to my porch like she owned the place. I leaned on the axe handle and wiped sweat off my brow. "That's funny. I don't recall giving you my number." She didn't laugh. Not that she ever did. "I need your cabin keys," she said, flipping through her clipboard like this was some sort of scheduled thing. "We're doing random interior inspections this week. HOA policy." I blinked. "Interior inspections? Of private property?" "Yes," she said, smug as ever. "It's in our new compliance addendum." "I never voted on that," I said, crossing my arms. She sniffed. "Well, it passed by board majority. The board's 3 people. Including you," I replied. "It's still valid, Samuel. Now the keys." I stared at her. No, Pamela's nostrils flared. "If you refuse, I'll have to report you for non-compliance. That's a Tier 3 violation. You could lose your cabin rights." "You mean the cabin I own outright? The one I paid for 10 years ago with cash?" I said. "Not happening." She stepped closer. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Do you have something to hide? We've had reports of non-standard renovations." I almost laughed. The only thing I'd renovated was the broken railing on my deck, which I fixed myself because the HOA took 9 months to approve anything. "I'm calling your bluff, Pamela," I said. "You're not getting my keys." She raised her voice. "Then I'm escalating this. You'll be hearing from the enforcement committee." I shrugged. "Then I'll be hearing from 3 more Karens with clipboards. Good luck with that." She stormed off, muttering something about people thinking they're above the rules. I watched her go, then walked inside and pulled out a folder from my drawer. I've been collecting every HOA letter, email, and notice since I moved in. Something told me it was time to finally use it. But first I made one call. Not to Pamela. Not to the so-called enforcement committee. I called Douglas Penner, Pamela's boss, the president of the entire regional HOA authority. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Douglas Penner." "Hey Douglas, it's Samuel Dyer from Hidden Pines. Thought you'd want to know Pamela Withers just demanded my cabin keys for an interior inspection." There was a long pause. "She did what?" Douglas inhaled sharply on the other end of the line. "She's not authorized to conduct or even suggest interior inspections. That's a legal landmine. She came to my property uninvited," I said, watching a hawk trace a lazy circle overhead. "Tried to make it sound official. Clipboard and everything." "I'll look into it immediately," he said. "You didn't let her inside, did you?" "No chance." "Good. Keep any correspondence she's sent. I'll be in touch before sundown." The call ended. I hung the receiver on its hook and stared out at the trees for a moment. The wind was picking up one of those slow, creeping mountain gusts that made the pine needles whisper secrets. I had a feeling those secrets were about to surface. I walked back out to finish stacking the last of the firewood, but the peaceful rhythm was broken again. This time, by a white SUV pulling up to the edge of my gravel drive. The man who stepped out wasn't from around here. Clean loafers, dark jeans, polo shirt too crisp for any local hardware store. He carried a briefcase and looked around like he was expecting armed guards. "Mr. Dyer?" he asked, walking up cautiously. "That's me," I said, straightening. He offered a hand. "Mark Llewellyn. I represent several property owners in Hidden Pines. I was just visiting a client when I heard about an incident involving the HOA. Mind if I ask a few questions? You a lawyer? Yes. Real estate law mostly. What happened earlier today? I told him briefly, carefully. He didn't interrupt, just nodded along, occasionally scribbling into a slim notebook. When I finished, he closed it with a quiet snap. That's exactly the kind of overreach we've been worried about, he said. You're not the first to be threatened. Threatened with what? I asked. Revocation of property privileges, forced inspections, sudden fines. One of my clients had his driveway partially torn up because he didn't get approved gravel. Another was fined nearly $4,000 for trimming a dead tree without written consent. That's insane. It's illegal, he said calmly. But when people don't push back, it escalates. He handed me a card. If you need representation, I'm offering it pro bono for now, just in case things get uglier. Appreciate it, I said, pocketing the card. He nodded once and left. No hard pitch, no promises, just a man clearly used to dealing with messes left by people like Pamela. I went inside, put on some coffee, and started organizing my files. Everything was there. Fines issued, photos of my own repairs, dated letters, even the copy of the original HOA charter I had requested years ago out of sheer paranoia. I'd never trusted how quickly Pamela rose through the ranks. She showed up one spring as a community liaison, and within 18 months, she was rewriting bylaws and chairing meetings that no one remembered having. At 4:30, Douglas called back. Samuel, I spoke with 2 other residents who had similar encounters this week. She's acting entirely on her own. No authorization, no recorded votes. We're suspending her immediately pending a formal investigation. Suspending? I asked. That's not going to stop her. We're also freezing her access to HOA funds and communication channels, he added. She can't send notices or collect fines. I could hear the tension in his voice. This wasn't just a rogue board member. This was a liability. She's already crossed the line, I said. You might want to look into how she's been using those funds. There was a pause. What are you suggesting? I've seen the new clubhouse budget. $38,000 for consulting fees and aesthetic upgrades. Yet nothing's changed except a new sign and a broken soda machine. I'll have our audit team look into it immediately. I hung up and started digging deeper. I hadn't planned on spending the evening buried in paperwork, but something told me this went further than a power trip. I was right. By 10 that night, I found it. A payment ledger buried in the quarterly expense reports. 3 payments listed under property consultation services, all made out to a company I'd never heard of, Pineview Dynamics, LLC. The address? A P.O. box in the next county over. I cross-referenced it with state business registrations. The listed owner? Pamela Withers. She'd been funneling HOA funds into her own shell company. I took screenshots, printed copies, and contacted Mark Llewellyn with everything I had. He called me back almost immediately. This is textbook embezzlement, he said. You just handed us the smoking gun. You think she'll run? She doesn't know we know yet, he said. But when she finds out, she might try. By morning, news had started to trickle through the neighborhood. A few residents stopped by, curious, uneasy. I didn't share specifics. Not yet. But I told them enough. Pamela had been suspended, and an investigation was underway. Then, around noon, the sheriff's department showed up. 3 deputies and a plainclothes investigator knocked on Pamela's door down on Cedar Ridge. According to my neighbor, she answered in a silk robe with a coffee mug that said, Boss Lady. 10 minutes later, they walked her out in a gray hoodie and jeans, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Apparently, they'd matched the P.O. box to a set of fraudulent invoices for landscaping services that were never rendered. Over $50,000 had vanished from the HOA's common fund in less than 2 years. All routed through Pineview Dynamics. Residents gathered as the news spread. No one cheered, but the quiet satisfaction was thick in the air. People who'd been too afraid to speak up before were suddenly swapping stories, sharing printed letters, comparing their own violations. Douglas called later that afternoon. She's been formally removed. We're convening a special election to replace her seat. I'd like you to consider running. Not interested in power, I said. Just peace. Then maybe you're exactly who we need. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I walked to the edge of the ridge behind my cabin and watched the sun dip behind the trees. The wind was back, colder now, carrying away the last of her grip on this place. My phone buzzed again. A message from Mark. Local papers running the story tomorrow. Front page. Finally, Hidden Pines was waking up. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a chainsaw echoing from the direction of Birch Hollow. That wasn't unusual in a timber-lined mountain community like Hidden Pines, but the tone was off short bursts, revved too high, like someone was trying to force their way through something they shouldn't. I pulled on my boots and headed out. Halfway down the trail, I ran into Clara Jensen, retired firefighter, tough as nails, and one of the only long-timers left who hadn't been cowed by the HOA. She was waving her arms at two men in neon vests who were hacking away at the old community notice board. They say they've got orders, Clara said as I approached, but won't say from who. The taller of the two men stepped back, clearly uncomfortable. We were told to remove all outdated signage. That's what the work order says. I held out my hand. Let me see it. He hesitated, then passed over a folded sheet. It was a flimsy printout with no letterhead, no signatures, and no authorizing body. Just a vague directive to clear obsolete structures per compliance directive. Clara leaned in. That board's not obsolete. It's where we post bear sightings and emergency alerts. What's next? They gonna tear down the fire bell. I looked at the workers. You mind waiting a few minutes? They both nodded, clearly grateful for the out. I headed straight to the old HOA records shed near the maintenance yard, where the board had stored physical archives before everything went digital. The place had been locked up for years, but I still had the key from when I volunteered during wildfire season 5 years back. Inside, I found what I was looking for. A hard copy map of the original community layout. On the back, a handwritten clause from the founding charter required that all emergency infrastructure, including the notice board, be preserved unless replaced with an equal or superior system. I took a photo and sent it straight to Douglas. By the time I got back to the hollow, the workers were already packing up. Clara grinned. Guess somebody made a call. Douglas confirmed it later that afternoon. Apparently, someone had tried to submit a work order under the HOA's name using a deactivated admin code Pamela's old account. She was supposed to be locked out of all systems, but she'd found a way in. Again. Later, I met with Mark at his office in town. He was going over some paperwork with a young paralegal when I arrived. His desk strewn with manila folders and a half-eaten burrito. She's lawyered up, he said, sliding a stapled packet across the desk. Her attorney claims she was authorized for all expenditures, and that the board had implied consent. She's not going quietly, then. Would you, if you siphoned off over 50 grand and thought you had a shot at burying it? I skimmed the document. They're leaning on ambiguity. Exactly, but we've got something better. Paper trail, unauthorized access logs, and now a fake work order tied to her login. Plus, there's a new wrinkle. He pulled out a slim blue folder and opened it to a glossy photo. It was a warehouse. Big, gray, fortified. A sign above it read, Brimridge Storage Solutions. Never heard of it, I said. Neither had we, until we dug into Pineview Dynamics tax filings. Turns out Pamela rented a unit there under the HOA's name and paid for it using one of their sub-accounts. But it wasn't listed on any inventory or expense report. What's inside? Sheriff's office is getting a warrant now. If there's anything in there that ties back to HOA funds, equipment, documents, electronics, it's evidence. And if there's anything personal, it's misappropriation. I leaned back in the chair. That's a felony. Minimum of 2, Mark said. Wire fraud and misuse of community assets. If there's anything stolen, add grand theft. That afternoon, the sheriff's office executed the search. I wasn't there, but I got the call within 2 hours. They found a locked cabinet containing HOA checkbooks, a retired laptop with admin access credentials, and most bizarrely a set of high-end surveillance equipment. Cameras, microphones, and what looked like a drone in mid-assembly. Douglas called me shortly after. She was recording residents. We found labeled files. Names, timestamps, even footage from inside a few homes. She was flying the drone over properties and using it to justify fines. I felt my stomach turn. That's criminal trespass, if not worse. We're handing it all over to county investigators. If they can tie any of this to her fines or enforcement actions, every violation she issued could be voided. She's been spying on people to fabricate grounds for penalties. And profiting from it. That night, the community gathered at the lodge for an emergency town hall. It was packed standing room only, with more than 100 residents crammed shoulder to shoulder. Some I hadn't seen outside their porches in years. The air buzzed with tension, but for once, it wasn't fear. It was anger, focused and sharp. Douglas took the mic first. He laid out everything. The forged work orders, the hidden storage, the illegal surveillance. Gasps rippled through the crowd when he mentioned the drone footage. Then he opened the floor. People surged forward. One man described how he was fined for an illegal addition to his patio. Turns out she'd zoomed in on a temporary canopy during a barbecue. A woman said her dog had been reported for aggressive behavior and threatened with removal. The footage showed nothing but it barking at a squirrel. When I stepped up, the room quieted. I don't want a board that hides behind rules they make up as they go, I said. And I don't want a community that's afraid to fix a railing or plant a tree without asking permission from someone with a clipboard. I paused, looking around the room. Pamela's gone, but the system that let her operate is still here. If we don't change it, someone else will slip right into her shoes. There were nods. Real ones this time. Douglas stepped back up. We're dissolving the current board effective immediately. A transitional council of 5 volunteers will oversee operations while we rewrite the charter with resident input. Elections will be held after the new framework is ratified. Clara raised her hand. And if someone tries to pull this crap again? Douglas looked her in the eye. They won't get past the first meeting. The vote was unanimous. Over the next few weeks, the community began to shift. The surveillance fines were wiped clean. Residents got refunds for illegitimate fees. The new council, made up of a nurse, a retired teacher, an electrician, a rancher, and a software engineer, was transparent, open, and fiercely local. Mark helped draft the new charter language. It included term limits, public meeting requirements, and a clause banning any form of covert surveillance without court order. Every decision had to be documented and published within 48 hours. As for Pamela, charges were filed formally by the county district attorney. Embezzlement, forgery, illegal surveillance, and misappropriation of funds. Her bail was denied after investigators found evidence she'd attempted to transfer money to an offshore account. The day they hauled her into court, she didn't wear sunglasses or carry a clipboard. She sat in an orange jumpsuit, eyes down, no lawyer beside her. Apparently, her high-priced attorney bowed out after seeing the drone footage. I was called in to testify as a witness to her attempted interior inspection. I kept it simple, just the facts. The judge didn't need theatrics. He had a binder full of evidence and a courtroom full of neighbors who'd had enough. She was sentenced to 6 years with no parole. After the hearing, Clara invited everyone back to the lodge. We had pie, coffee, and a bonfire that lasted until long after the stars came out. People laughed again. Not nervously, not cautiously, just honestly. Kids ran around barefoot. Nobody mentioned fines or rules or clipboards. As I walked back to my cabin, I passed the new notice board. It had a fresh coat of paint and a laminated map of local trails. Someone had pinned a flyer for a community potluck next Saturday. No drones overhead, no hidden cameras, just neighbors finally free. 3 months passed. The lodge had been renovated not just cosmetically, but repurposed into a genuine community center again. No more mandatory meetings with stiff chairs and veiled threats. Now it hosted weekend workshops, volunteer sign-ups, and even a Wednesday night bluegrass circle that had drawn in folks from neighboring towns. I hadn't planned on sticking my nose into HOA business after everything. But one morning, I got a knock at the cabin door just after sunup. It was Milo, the rancher on the transitional council. He wore a faded ball cap and held a clipboard that looked like it had been through a hailstorm. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Sure. Coffee's on." He followed me in, glanced around, and waited until we both had mugs in hand before speaking. "Mind taking a look at something?" He handed over a folded document, pages thick and stamped with a notary seal. I read through it slowly. At first glance, it looked like a land easement proposal until I hit the clause halfway down. It authorized the transfer of 5 undeveloped lots on the North Ridge to a corporate entity listed as Blue Trail Holdings. The signature at the bottom wasn't anyone from the current council. It was dated nearly a year ago. "Pamela signed this," I said. Milo nodded. "Filed it 5 months before she was suspended. We only found it because the county clerk flagged it during a title search. Blue Trail's trying to claim ownership now. They were never approved to develop anything up here." "Exactly. But the paperwork's clean. It's in the system, on record, and unless we can prove fraud, they've got a legal foothold." I set the document down. "You think she sold them off?" "For a price. But she didn't just sell them. She bundled them with a provision that waives environmental review." My stomach turned. The North Ridge bordered protected watershed. Any disruption could cause runoff into the valley below. It wasn't just shady. It was dangerous. Who owns Blue Trail? We traced the registration. Seychelles. But the managing partner? Her cousin. Lives in Arizona. Never been here. I leaned back. That's why she was so obsessed with power. It wasn't about rules. It was about carving the place up for profit. Milo rubbed his jaw. "We need to stop this before they break ground." "Have they started?" "They sent a rep to survey last week. Mark's already filed a motion to freeze the title transfer, but a judge won't hold it unless we show intent to defraud." I stood up and grabbed the folder from my cabinet, the one with all the old HOA records. I pulled out the budget summary I'd copied months ago. She hid payments, set up fake inspections. She knew how to bury things. Milo tapped the easement paper. "Then we need to unbury this." We brought everything to Mark's office. He was already dressed for court, tie slightly crooked and coffee in hand. He scanned the document, eyes narrowing. "She filed this using an outdated board resolution code. Clever. Looks legitimate, but the resolution it references was repealed 2 years earlier." "Can we prove she knew that?" Mark nodded. "If we find the repeal notice in her emails, or better, if she acknowledged it in writing, we've got more than fraud. We've got premeditated concealment." "Search warrant?" I asked. He was already dialing. By afternoon, the county judge approved an emergency review. The sheriff's office accompanied us back to the HOA storage unit, the same one where surveillance gear had been found. This time, we had a digital forensics team in tow. They pulled the hard drive from her old laptop and cloned it on site. Within hours, we had our answer. A PDF attachment titled Board Res 78 Nullified.pdf was found in her inbox. She'd received it 8 months before filing the bogus easement. She forwarded it to someone named G. Withers with the subject line, "Ignore this. I'll push it through anyway." Mark looked up from the screen. That's intent. We filed charges the next morning. The DA added 2 new counts: fraudulent transfer of property and falsifying public documents. She was now facing over 20 years if convicted. But there was still the matter of Blue Trail Holdings. They weren't backing down. Their lawyer, a slick type from out of state, argued that the transfer had been legally recorded and their client had no knowledge of internal HOA issues. At the preliminary hearing, Mark brought the hammer down. "We're prepared to show that Blue Trail Holdings was not an innocent third party," Mark said, holding up a printed email chain. "This is correspondence between Pamela Withers and Gregory Withers, her cousin and Blue Trail's managing partner. In it, they discuss lot pricing, development permits, and how to push it through before the council wakes up." The opposing counsel went pale. The judge didn't hesitate. "The court finds sufficient grounds to void the easement pending trial. All development activity is to cease immediately." Blue Trail's lawyer tried to object. The judge cut him off. "Your client is welcome to challenge the decision through civil court. In the meantime, the title remains with the HOA, and any attempt to access the land will be considered trespass." After the hearing, we stepped outside into the cold mountain air. Douglas was waiting by the steps, hands in his coat pockets. "I had no idea she was doing all that," he said. "No one did," I replied. "She counted on that." He nodded. "We've started a full forensic audit. If there's anything else she buried, we'll find it." As it turned out, there was. Over the next 2 weeks, the auditors uncovered a secondary bank account under the HOA's tax ID, used exclusively for deposits from Blue Trail and 2 other unnamed firms. It was hidden behind a nested set of routing transfers and had been active for over a year. The total balance at the time of discovery was just under $74,000. An emergency session was held at the community center. This time it wasn't about outrage. It was about closure. Mark presented the findings, and then Douglas announced that the funds had been recovered and would be used to restore the North Ridge. The council voted unanimously to place the entire section under a conservation easement permanently protected from development. Clara stood up and proposed renaming the trailhead that led into the ridge. "Something that reminds us why we stand up when it counts." Someone suggested Withers Ridge sarcastically, which got a few laughs. But in the end, they settled on Guardian's Pass. I liked that. The trial began quietly. Pamela's attorney tried to negotiate a deal, but the DA refused. Too many people had been affected. Too many lies. She was convicted on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, unauthorized surveillance, and illegal property transfer. She received 12 years, no parole. When the sentence was read, she didn't say a word. Just stared straight ahead like none of it had anything to do with her. Back in Hidden Pines, the council ratified the new charter. Not a single vote against it. The changes were sweeping open finance reports, rotating council seats, and a recall measure that could be triggered by just 15 verified residents. More than that, people had begun helping each other again. Real help. Not in exchange for favors or status. Just neighbors doing what neighbors are supposed to do. I finished repairing the old fire tower trail with Milo, Clara, and a few volunteers one weekend in late fall. It was peaceful work, honest work, and when we reached the summit, we planted a small wooden sign: "Keep watch, keep honest." That winter, the first snow came early. I sat on my porch with a blanket and a thermos, watching the flakes gather on the railing. No drones. No letters taped to my door. No one trying to measure the angle of my roof shingles. Just quiet, earned quiet, and for the first time in years, it felt like Hidden Pines belonged to the people who lived there, not the ones who tried to rule it.